There seems to be a thread running through these three readings this morning, and that thread seems to be one of allegiance. In that reading from the first book of Samuel, the people have come to Samuel, and they're asking for a king. And if you'll remember, we're talking about a confederation of tribes. And these tribes had chieftains, and then there were the judges, and there was no overarching king in any way that we would understand kingship. And the people came to Samuel and said, "We want a king." And he wanted to know why, and they said, "Well, everybody else has got it." And my mother would say, "Well, if everybody else is going to jump off a bridge, would you jump too?" He couldn't seem to talk him out of it. He goes and he prays. And in the way, he has this conversation with God in the way that the Old Testament prophets seem to have this casual relationship. And God basically says, "Don't take this personally, because that's what they've been doing to me ever since I got them out of Egypt. They've been clamoring after something other than me." There was the golden calf, you know the story. And then Samuel goes back and he lays out all the reasons why they don't want a king. But they insist. And so it's their allegiance. The whole concept of this notion of not having a king was that God was their king, that the supreme authority was in the divine. And that they would draw strength from that, they would draw leadership from that divine source. They didn't need a king. Now they want a king. So they're saying, their allegiance now is shifting from things invisible to things visible. A king. Which takes us to Paul's letter, second letter, to the church in Corinth. And Paul he's not talking about civic leadership in this regard. He's talking about allegiance. Where do you put your trust, your allegiance? Things seen, and anything seen will deteriorate and pass away. The volcano in Hawaii is actively, it's building an island and destroying everything else. There's all these, anything seen will be destroyed. It's that unseen. And of course, he's talking about the divine. He's talking about God here. Do you put your trust in things that are passing away or things that are eternal? Allegiance. Where is your allegiance? Then in the gospel, Jesus has begun his ministry in this story. He's begun his ministry. His family is concerned about it. They think he's lost his mind. They're not worried that he's run off and joined a cult. They're worried that he started one. And they think he's crazy. I mean, the things that he's saying and doing. So he's in with his disciples, and the family comes and they're trying to claim him. They want him to come with them so they can do what? They're not going to take him to a therapist. They're not going to get him medicated. He says, no. My real family is those who do the will of God, which we have to assume means are listening to these teachings, who are setting their lives and their allegiance with the divine and not with whatever we're supposed to believe his birth family is putting their allegiance to. Social convention, the temple authority. It's not really clear. But that allegiance, his allegiance, is with these people. These people who we assume are followers of his teachings and his understanding of the nature of the divine. So what about us? We have areas of allegiance to greater or lesser degrees in our lives, and the thing about allegiance is that it must be voluntary by definition. There is no such thing as involuntary allegiance. Allegiance has to be a choice. It's a matter of the heart. Where am I putting my allegiance? Not where am I putting my allegiance that I'm told to put. And I think it's often difficult for people to appreciate one another's ways of expressing that allegiance. We have allegiances to our families to greater or lesser degrees, and it looks very different in different circumstances. We have allegiances to our countries, which look different in different circumstances. We have allegiances to God and church, which are going to look different in different circumstances. I had a relative who was in Afghanistan. This was not on a tourist visa. And people would, I heard family members make comments about how he just fell off the face of the earth. He just disappeared. You know, he's over there halfway around the world, and he's abandoned his family. He didn't have to join the army. But he was in contact using Skype or some similar medium almost every day with his dad. He'd go out into the field, sometimes be gone several days, come back in, phone up his dad, talk it over, talk about what had happened. And those that finally found out about this connection began to wish that they had that level of connection with their offspring, their adult offspring. My cousin, whose son he was, spoke with him every couple of days and felt like he was closer than he'd ever been to him. Different families have different ways of being in allegiance with one another. With regard to our country, what are the ways that we are expected to show allegiance? There seems to be a very high priority today. There are people who condemn the NFL players for their protest and say it's un-American, that it's an insult to fighting men and women, that it's an insult to the flag. There are people who say that it's not a protest against the flag or the anthem, that it's a protest against police brutality. And that police brutality against people of color is much more of an insult to our nation than whatever posture you may take during the playing of the national anthem. There are people who claim not to have any allegiance to their country or to condemn it all the time, and yet they are heavily engaged in the political process. They pay their taxes. They participate in the civil discourse. It's hard to really say from the outside looking in any comment about one's allegiance. Unless you're there in their head with them, it's hard to really know. With regard to church and to God, it's the same notion here. There are lots of people who make a lot of lip service to their allegiance to God and to the church. But there's a saying, if it was against the law to be a believer, would there be sufficient evidence to convict you? It's what we do. It's how we are transformed by that relationship that is important. Do we just give lip service? Or do we actually engage? And that may be the real operative principle in this whole allegiance idea. How are we engaged to that which we owe our allegiance? With regard to our allegiance to church and to God, it's in many ways similar to all the others. Do we allow that divine presence to be in our lives as a transforming force, to bring us to a place of interior peace, exterior peace, generosity, compassion, empathy, all those values that we say that Jesus teaches us about? Or do we just become the town scold? Are we just a harpy? Are we just pointing the finger at, choose any finger you desire, at the rest of the world? Or how is it? Do we actually support this institution, which is what it is, this institution that is a context for that engagement with the divine? Do we give of our time? Do we give of our talent? Do we give of our treasure? Do we give money to support the ministry? Are we an active part? Are we engaged? Allegiance is a very tricky thing. It's something that can be incredibly empowering It can be incredibly transformative, not only for ourselves, but for the whole world, whether it be family, church, or country. It can be transformative. It can also be destructive. And the most destructive it becomes is when we become subject to imposed allegiance. The worst thing that can happen in any of those contexts, any of those three contexts, is that it become forced. Then it's no longer a voluntary allegiance. It's no longer a true allegiance. It's subjugation. And that subjugation inevitably, invariably leads to destruction. So, as we go out into our week, try to remember to take note of your allegiances. What is the nature of that allegiance? Is it an allegiance that actually is meaningful, or is something as silly as which kind of truck you drive? It's an opportunity to really build on that allegiance so that it becomes a powerful force, so that it somehow becomes this intersection of that which is visible and that which is invisible. Amen.